On the Security Weekly News, I try to scan and produce a quick look at some of the major stories to help you keep up with what's going on in and around the industry in a short format. Myself, Aaron Leyland, Josh Marpet, and other guest commentators provide greater insight every week. I'm Doug White, and I hope that you'll look for the Security Weekly News in all of your favorite podcast catchers and subscribe for the latest content.
Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked with Adriana Villela about adding observability to services and asking proactive questions of your answers and crossing our fingers that observability can give you some useful answers. Here to give you some useful answers, I think, is me, your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with, once again, the man who's been putting A and S into ASW, Adrian Sanabria. Hello, Adrian.
Hey, how's it going? I didn't expect to be back so soon, but always happy to help you guys out.
John was telling me you all had way too much fun in November, so I had to partake as well. I was getting jealous.
This is my favorite Security Weekly show. That's not my Security Weekly show.
Yeah, so this is, in our last segment, we talked with Adriana, who has a Geeking Out podcast, so I encourage everyone to go check out her podcast. And, of course, Adrian has a pitch for ESW Enterprise, which is a good... I don't know how many Star Trek references you make, but I would not. I would just make Star Trek references all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think they were overdone in the early days of it, and that's why the intro is like lasers shooting stuff and stuff exploding. But yeah, I think if anything, we're trying to move away from that at this point.
Well, you know what's not overdone in application security? Fuzzing and AI. And those are my two themes for news this week. So way back in October, for those listeners who remember when I was actually hosting at one point, I came up with this hypothesis that I think CPU cycle for CPU cycle, or time for time, or dollar per CPU cycle, I think that fuzzing is the best investment we have for finding vulns. Lots of people are throwing AI at this, or using AI to find vulnerabilities, which I shouldn't dismiss, but I'm curious to watch how that develops. So in that vein, I've got two articles. The first one is from Trail of Bits blog, who just pure fuzzing between the lines in popular barcode software. Now, barcode scanners, they are out there. I don't know that everybody actually has one, although I risk saying that because I know Adrian's probably going to turn and pull one off of his shelf behind him. But with that aside, this article is also really good about just describing some of the steps to actually fuzzing a project. So it just so happens they're focused on ZBAR. It's written in C, so that's conducive to fuzzing, C and C++, of course. But what the Trail of Bits were noting, that they had, quote, observed cases where project builds were failing for months and were not being actively fuzzed. So part of Google's support about the OSS fuzz is just to get, and the Open SSF, is just add fuzzing everywhere. But fuzzing also takes some maintenance, and it takes some identifying fuzzing targets. And one of the things they develop, or the Trail of Bits folks discovered
Trail of Bugs.
The Trail of Bugs. They leave a trail of bugs fixed behind them. Is that
their blog should be named Trail of Bugs.
Trail of Bugs, because that's what they find and exploit all the time. And they do that with creating test cases for fuzzing. And they were pointing out that it took a little bit for this fuzzer to go from just a 2x2 image to figure out what the right image needed to be as an input for fuzzers. But once they did that, they identified some vulnerabilities. So long story short, fuzzing is still out there, is still successful. But now let's pull in the Google blog about leveling up fuzzing, finding more vulns with AI. So the Google security blog says they also love fuzzing. Their own OSS fuzz has fixed, what is their number? 11,000 vulnerabilities in the 8 years of the project. So that's pretty awesome. But what they're highlighting is 26 new vulns were found using AI-generated and enhanced fuzz targets. So this is basically AI harnessing and using the fuzzer as an agent. And this, to me, spoke to me in the sense of, this sounds like actually the good type of use of AI because it's saving developer time. It's still using fuzzing to find vulns, but it's saving security folks time, saving the trail of bits folks times in terms of just getting that fuzzer to work better to interact with that whatever target they're going after. And I don't know, Adrian, so in here too, this is where I'm curious, just how you respond or where you see this use of AI and within security. Does this speak to you more as like the normal trend of AI taking over or just AI kind of assisting? Loaded question here.
Yeah, well, I think this is the perfect example of the kind of mundane work like figuring out fuzz input, and there's so many targets, just to point, them pointing out that ZBar is this hugely popular library for reading barcodes, and it's probably never been fuzzed, right? And it's, this is something where the code's only purpose is to read untrusted input. Right? Like that's its only purpose, and nobody's ever fuzzed it. This is, I remember doing some work on NFC tags also, because NFC tags probably another category where to this date, they just haven't been, I bet there's a lot of fuzzing to do there as well. I've not seen anybody really kind of tackle that. I bet Apple has. Apple was very reluctant to throw NFC into their phones, and eventually did so that they could enable Apple Pay. Because that's how Apple Pay works is using NFC, and they're very restrictive in what they allow you to use it for on their phone. So they've definitely followed these kinds of lessons learned here at the bottom here, where they talk about these barcode. This particular library can read all kinds of code types, so if you only need one of them, like QR codes, maybe limit it to that, don't allow it to do everything. And Apple's definitely done a lot of limiting for NFC in their platform. But one of the exciting things about cybersecurity is it's one of those areas where there's a good chance you could throw a dart at something and be the first to research it, right?
No, that's a great point, because there are just really creative and I was going to say an important, or maybe I'll just say useful software out there. Everybody has their one thing they're focusing on, but the number of developers far outweighs the number of AppSec folks. And here, I don't necessarily think this is a pitch for like AppSec, there we have 1 million unopened, open AppSec careers or jobs available. I don't want to dig into myths or replicate any myths here, right. But it does point out just the amount of code being written is ZBar is in C as opposed to Go or Rust, because I think it's pretty old. It predated those. Mm-hmm. And even OpenSS Fuzz is not even on I think it's finally across the top 500 open source projects that OpenSSF was trying to get it deployed on. But that's 500 out of probably how many we could rattle off just if we went through, repos that start with the letter A.
Yeah.
But, and here, speaking of repos, and speaking of AI, we've got maybe, I don't want to be too mean, but we've got sort of a mundane case, then a very fun case of AI. But let's keep people in suspense. Let's start with a bit of mundane. And this is an article that you found, Adrian, about AI. Let's see if I can get this out. AIAC, Infrastructure as Code Generator. Tell us a bit more about this.
Yeah, so artificial intelligence and infrastructure as code generator. Infrastructure as code is code like any other code. So, it's absolutely open for using AI to help you write that code. And I'm knowing. We're always going to have vulnerabilities in AI-generated code. I think this is a particularly spicy place to use it, but absolutely, I'm sure people are already doing this with just general AI chatbots with Copilot for GitHub. I'm not sure what custom work they've done here to make this one, especially useful for infrastructure as code. But I don't know. Maybe it's less risky using a purpose-built tool than just using ChatGPT or Claude or Copilot for GitHub.
I suppose, and I think, if at least YAML is more human-friendly to read, but Terraform the YAML can very quickly just get like, my eyes hurt looking at this. But there is at least the idea that you can have linters, you can identify some misconfiguration patterns. So hopefully that combination of just let the LLM go generate some Terraform for you from some natural language, and have the linter kind of confirm and make sure it didn't, accidentally open that S3 bucket to the world or something like that. Feels like a good check and balance there.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can use different backends with this as well. Like that's maybe one of the features there. Like if you wanted to use a local implementation of Olama. But again, I'm not sure. Maybe listeners know something I don't hear, but I'm not sure why you wouldn't just use one of the mainstream tools to do this. Like you could just use Olama directly. I'm not sure why you need this particular library to do it for you.
We live in the world where AI is the buzzword and everything must become AI-ified, to coin a term. Make the VCs happy, Adrian. Come on, put that E in enterprise.
I mean, looking at the demo, maybe you want to set some configuration. Like if there's a certain AWS region you're always going to be using, you don't want to enter the same commands every time. You don't want to. You want to simplify the question. You want to get things done a little bit faster. You find a particular generative AI model that you like. You can hone that in, and I don't know. I wonder if people are just using this as a tool to save them time, or if they're maybe even using this in a fully automated format. So more and more we're seeing agentic uses of Gen AI, which means there's not a human in the loop. So it'd be again interesting to hear from people how they're using this thing.
It would be, and I'm so glad you honed in on that aspect of time, and especially saving time, because that's honestly what a lot of developers are looking forward to. It also brings me of mind, I love the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy quote, time is an illusion, lunchtime doubly so. But speaking of not saving time, but wasting time, this is actually a wonderful use of AI. I finally will get onto the AI bandwagon for this one particular use case from O2, so this is a telecom in the UK, unveils Daisy, the AI granny wasting scammers' time. And so, as we've been talking about, time is a valuable resource. It's hard to get back time. And so scammers are out there going after different populations, trying to convince them to send them money, send them credentials so that they can take money, basically trying to extract something of value from the elderly, from people that are less technically savvy, and so on. One of the best countermeasures you can do is just to waste the scammer's time. Keep them on the phone, for example, for 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and then have that sting at the end and be like, sorry, you've been listening to ASW, and click, hang up. Because that's 45 minutes they weren't able to target someone else who may have become a victim. So this AI is based on some scam baiting. So it's actually been trained, it's been curated from people who do this manually, that are just fighting fraudsters trying to go after I'm starting to repeat myself, fighting fraudsters. So I just love this. I'm going to start stumbling over my words because I'm so excited. So Adrian, help me out here. What appealed, or did this appeal to you as much as it did to me?
Yeah, absolutely. I love the idea. I don't know how effective it is in practice. It would be good to see some stats on how much scammer time, like if this is really. Is this going to dissuade scammers, or is it just going to push scammers to create their own Daisy on the other side? So you just have AI talking to AI. So I've often, you've probably seen this too, where people will use their own time to waste scammers' time in via email or on social networks and things like that, or via text. And I've heard that most of those text scams that you get at this point are fully automated at this point. So they're only wasting their own time. They publish these, and yeah, you look very clever. It looks very funny that you've, trick this, whatever's on the other side and let it on for a while. And it does have some entertainment value. But if it's true that almost 100% of that is just a bot these days, then again, I think last laugh is on you. You've only wasted your own time there. And I think it's only a matter of time, to overuse the word, before that happens here as well. And just both sides, good guys and bad guys, are just burning GPU cycles, for no benefit whatsoever.
Yeah, it does come to mind of the idea of honeypots, and the idea that if you can use this and you're learning about new techniques or you're identifying new scam infrastructure, that then you can go target and take down that infrastructure. Big thumbs up. That's the learning point here that I think can be useful. I will point out, from, as you mentioned, there's definitely some entertainment value, just to laugh and follow along and like scam the scammer. There's also an aspect from that entertainment value of just normalizing that people can be scammed or people will be targeted. And here I just wanted to highlight that idea that there is a good aspect of taking away the stigma or the shame of scamming, the idea that, oh, it was your fault that you fell for this, much like we as the info industry need to get away. It's your fault for being a user. Like, why else did we design software? Right. Phishing awareness should be about, did you, set up your FIDO key and are you using that? Or are you still just typing in a raw username and password? Because if so, the design failed you, the user. You didn't fail the application. So that's my PSA for the day, as I want to riff off of this English granny scamming the scammers.
Yep, that's great.
Now, I'm going to switch to, so we're timeout time. I'm going to take a little bit of time to test your application security knowledge here, Adrian. You were very helpfully stepping in to host the show all of November. And so in that time, I assume that you've become an expert on lists, the OWASP Top 10, the OWASP Top 10 for LLMs, the OWASP Top 10 for Top 10 lists, etc. Did you know that there's also a CWE Top 25 most dangerous software weaknesses out there? Oh,
I did not.
Oh, that's good, because I'm going to start quizzing you on what do you think CWE 79 is?
Oh, without looking? No idea. Yeah. Not from the numbers.
To be fair, I don't know that one either. The only CWE I ever know is CWE 22, because that's related to path traversal. And that did show up as number 5 on this list. And the reason I was highlighting this list is that I hate lists, but I more just hate the passive generation of lists. The one thing I like about this, at least, is that a lot of these CWE titles are improper neutralization. So we've gotten a little bit away from the idea of input validation, because I will go on my own ranty bit that cross-site scripting, SQL injection, RCEs are not about input validation. You don't validate your input out of those. You sanitize it. You neutralize it at the point of use, is what I should be saying. So you can have like an Irish name with an O'Connell, an apostrophe in there. You shouldn't strip that out to prevent SQL injection. You should be using prepared statements, for example. So that's what I wanted to focus on here with this list. It's sort of a shrug for me. CISA, I know, loves tracking CWEs, but I don't know. I'm not on the CWE bandwagon these days.
Yeah, I think it's useful from a strategic standpoint. If you're looking to, you mentioned Rust earlier, if you're looking to, change up design, or you're starting a new project, and you want to take entire CWEs out of the equation. Depending on what you choose, the architecture you choose, the language you choose to write in, you can do some of that. But Yeah, I mean, it's vulnerability management is all about context, and it is useful to have this context when you're analyzing a vulnerability to know the CWEs that apply to it.
But even with that context, and I'm glad you brought that up, if we look at the top one, improper neutralization of input during web page generation, which is the fancy way of saying cross-site scripting, that's number one. The rank last year was number 2. But how many, if we talk about severity, if we look at the past year of vulnerabilities in VPN devices, it wasn't really, cross-site scripting that was doing it. If we look in the past year of memory safe code, call it Python, Java, et cetera, blah, 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 PHP, et cetera, applications weren't being compromised with consequence, as far as I can tell, through cross-site scripting. It was due more just to weak credentials, weak credential management, not supporting MFA, things like that. So there is still something where we have sort of that observer bias, where we find all these cross-site scripting, but maybe cross-site scripting is, I want to say, that solved problem with things like React, that we should be focusing on something else instead.
Yeah, I wonder. That's interesting. It also shows you CVEs and Kev in CISA's Kev list. Mm-hmm. I just now noticed that. It's. I'm now curious where this list comes from. They do have a methodology link here. Most dangerous software weaknesses list, calculated by analyzing public vulnerability information in the CVE records. Yeah. How do you? I mean, that's tough to do. I mean, we know like 99% of the vulnerabilities that receive a CVE never represent any real risk to an organization. So if they're not filtering for things that are actually exploitable, actually causing problems for businesses, and just going off that raw data, then this list is pretty useless.
And that's why it is nice.
It's not the real top 25.
Yeah, and as you pointed out, it does at least show this the CVEs and Kev. So that Kev is actually probably a more informative dimension here. Yeah. So that out of bounds right is pointing to, let's maybe stop with like new code being written in C. Let's figure out how to migrate things to Rust or to Go. And even with like CSRF is on the list at number 4. But so many frameworks have counters to CSRF. We have cookie ways of decorating cookies that mostly prevent CSRF types of attacks. So it's the type of thing that it's a code quality issue, but it doesn't feel like a most dangerous issue to me at all. So.
Well, and a lot of these CWEs are very specific to web apps, to AppSec type stuff that tends to be either SaaS apps or apps that you're going to build in-house and apply, I think, less to commercial off-the-shelf stuff, which is why in the top 10, you've got 3 of the top 10 that have 0 CVEs in Kev for those CWEs. And so it's a little bit apples and oranges here, where you're going to find these impacting your organization a lot is in code that you wrote, so it's not going to have a CVE, or code written on a SaaS portal or something like that. Which also, cloud providers, when they have vulnerabilities, SaaS providers, when they have vulnerabilities, those don't get CVEs because it's fix once, fix everywhere.
Yeah, and we've talked with Scott Piper even recently about that with the Cloud Vulns DB, that idea of these cloud service providers. They do tend to fix once and everywhere, but they don't necessarily fix a lot of legacy issues. So sometimes misconfigurations may be corrected, but they're still in that shared fate where the app owners still need to go and do something. Yeah. But in the spirit of time is on my mind. We've mentioned a couple times. We mentioned with Adriana in the last segment, in the interview segment as well. And, CWE, a weird list in my eyes. There's an even weirder list or a weird item that popped up on your radar, Adrian. You've got to tell us about this.
Yeah, so this is a wonderful write-up from the co-founder and CTO of SSO Ready, of all things, Ulysses Carrion. And the title of it is Australia/Lord_how is the weirdest time zone. But that doesn't really prepare you for this article, which is I wouldn't say a very long read. I would say this is maybe a 10 or 15 minute read. There is some code in it, but it does need to be read from top to bottom. And he writes it well. It's a good story that kind of unfolds slowly. Like he saves some of the weirdest stuff for the end, for you to get used to. Okay, what is the norm? What is normal? If you read the time zone definition files, for lack of the correct term here, but all systems have these files on them, but only after reading this article did I find out that macOS actually doesn't have some of these definitions, because there's weird stuff in there, like UTC -1, like there's 24-hour time. Which, why wouldn't you just say the next day instead of 24 hours ahead of GMT? But there's all kinds of stuff in these definition files that would break any reasonable code written to read and understand these files. So many of those lines are missing from some operating systems just because they would break code because they're so insane. But in case you're not aware, I think all of India is 5.5 hours ahead of GMT. Nepal is 5 hours, 45 minutes ahead. Some countries change daylight savings based on Ramadan. But Iran and the rest of the whole Arab world don't agree on when that is. So there's Ramadan starts at different times in different countries, which means you're going to change an hour here and there differently. Not everybody does an hour forward, an hour back. Some people do half an hour. Some people do 2 hours with daylight savings times. So there's just insane stuff in here, like just using CST and CDT casually, because we live in the US, you find out there are 66 instances of CST, which I think of as Central Standard Time, globally. So CST gets reused 66 times in 66 time zones. Same for CDT, same for CET for those in Central Europe. So you can't take anything for granted with time zones. They are insane.
And what I love about this is while we let Adrian's poor brain recover from reading from this article, is that this is a wonderful metaphor for parsing user-generated content. So we've got time zones. Adrian rattled off why PDT, CET, all these things they've got weird nuances. The exact same thing happens with image encoders, video encoders, audio encoders. And this is why we have so many vulnerabilities in those areas, and why in the past, over the year, like when John and I talk about Rust or memory safety, though anything you're parsing, that's the attack surface to drop into that memory safe code, because who knows what weird nuances and weird conflicts and things that are just coming up from what you're parsing.
Did you know you can have negative time, Mike? Greenland transitions to daylight savings time at -1 o'clock.
The only negative time I'm aware of is my cats, and not understanding that they've already been fed. They're like, no, we haven't.
Right.
So I'm there. Yeah. So that's the only negative time I'm aware of. But this is a wonderful exploration of just one very long text file that said lots of weird things.
And my favorite thing about this is just a guy who's probably trying to solve a time zone issue, and was just like, ADHD, like a lot of us have, was just looking through these files. And this entire thing was written just because he got curious and started playing around on a command line with awk, sed, and sort and unique. That's where all this came from. He was like, wait a minute, is everybody like this? I have a question, and sed, awk, sort, and unique can answer that question for me.
That's wonderful. And it points out to, I know people have looked at time zones and mucking about with things like cron jobs in the past, but it does still point to what you were saying earlier about there's a lot of software out there that not everybody has looked at, or people have looked at it But there's now a new lens. There's a different lens to look at it through. And that's whether it's fuzzing or just manual testing or just understanding how something works. Because the next step is now, now I can understand how to take it apart. And that's the really great application security mindset we love to generate around here.
Yep.
Speaking of positive things, so maybe I was a bit of a downer, a bit rough on CWE and top 10 lists, but to counter that, I wanted to highlight basically the stats page from Let's Encrypt, but this is because I was reminded, reading the Risky Business newsletter, that Let's Encrypt hit their 10-year anniversary on November 18th, 2014. And Let's Encrypt is one of those projects that I think is the not quite unsung, but undersung hero of actually doing security right. Meaning, rather than complaining for a decade or two and saying, hey, everybody should be using HTTPS by default, or please use HTTPS, or here's yet another, a DEF CON or a Black Hat presentation about how HTTP only connections can be, targeted, or here's a beast attack or a crime attack, or one of the fun acronyms for the OpenSSL. Let's Encrypt came along and they said, we're going to help everyone out, or as many people as we can, with two different types of costs. One is the cost of a certificate. Is basically free. You don't need to pay anything to acquire a cert. And probably even more importantly, the cost of maintenance, not zero, but it's heavily reduced because of their ACME protocol. And it's because of that shift of ACME and Let's Encrypt that we can actually start talking about having certificate lifetimes be less than 10 years, less than 5 years, even down to that 90-day to 30-day that Apple and Google have been pushing for. So I just wanted to basically give a big shout out to Let's Encrypt. And for those of you out there who have some money to give away for this end of the year, try donating to Let's Encrypt. They're doing great work.
And they just broke in November 2024 for the first time 6 million certificates issued per day. So they need money to operate infrastructure.
That's pretty amazing. Those are awesome numbers. And now real quick then, I was just, as we're running out of times ourselves, I did have a quick article from Source Code Red about repo swatting attack deletes GitHub and GitLab accounts. Now, the specifics of this are basically a malicious actor can go into something like the comments section, or they don't necessarily have to be a participant in a project, or even for a long time an authenticated user of one of these platforms, to essentially associate a malicious binary with a project and then report that project for containing malware, serving malware, and basically getting the project banned, or taking the time of the project owner to have to say, no, this wasn't us, this is a malicious user, et cetera, et cetera. My point here is just, I like this type of attack because it's touching on, call it trust and safety, or the business logic of an application. And you're not going to find this type of thing on a CWE list or well described even in like a top 10 list, because it's very much custom to the application. You have to have that, what have we built? What could go wrong? And I like that thinking of what can go wrong that has nothing to do with things like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, but more of how can we use valid requests to set up an invalid scenario or work against the interests of our users. So I wanted to highlight this as sort of one of those areas that I love looking for these types of vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and it's just the TLDR here is, as the title implies, this is someone basically making up an infraction and getting somebody's code repo shut down because of it. So they upload something malicious to that account, and then they report it. Kind of like we've seen ransomware operators compromising organizations and then reporting them to the SEC when they don't report it within the required 4 days. And I'm not sure what the attacker gets out of it here. I'm not sure if this is I have beef with this.
Yeah, it's more like a griefing type of.
Yeah,
type of attack,
exactly. Yeah, almost more coming out of the gaming world, which is where swatting came from in the first place. some kind of relationship issue, or, maybe they don't like what they're doing with a fork of their own project or something like that. But I think there's some clear lessons learned here. I think, we might have to move to something where you have to establish baseline reputation before you're allowed to add files to other people's projects, which is the primary way of swatting here. And maybe you also need to have some level of reputation of trustworthiness before you can report somebody. It shouldn't be this easy.
And that starts to bring in that idea of identity, reputation, and the tension there with anonymity as well, right? So we could probably have an entire segment just talking about that and what are the implications and the trade-offs here to do.
It's a solved problem on Reddit,
security.
right? Like Reddit has figured this out.
And so, maybe we should grab some people from Reddit and have some, who do we know that works there? And
Matt Johansson is over there now. Yeah.
There we go. So this is where I say thank you very much, Adrian. I learned a lot by walking through the news with you, and clearly, I think it sounds like application security rubbed off on you on the month of November. So very much appreciate your time stepping in for the show.
I learn a lot always as well. Thank you.
Thank you again. And yes, listeners, please, of course, remember to subscribe, but check out ESW as well. Share about us on the socials. Check out the show notes. And speaking of application security, check out My Mistake by Nina. We'll see you next time on Application Security Weekly.